Ibn Arabi in the Meccan Revelations, Kitab al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, describes the place of angels, jinns and other spirits. In order to create the cosmos with all its invisible and visible levels, Allah composes words, sentences, books employing those 28 letters. Each of the 28 letters corresponds to several things, including one of the divine names and one category of creature. I was a hidden treasure, I love to be known, hence I created the world so that I would be known. Hadith Qudsi. The 26th letter represents the jinn, and the 25th the angels, insomuch as these creatures are present in the invisible realm of the returning ark. Furthermore, according to classical huruf, the root of JNN means to cover, veil, conceal. Al-Futuhat reveals both the connections between the jinns and the elements of his cosmos, and the different levels of interpretation of this concept. In contrast to modern sciences which atomize the physical and subatomic worlds with nothing else, Allah has divided our world into regions as it approaches the subatomic, which begin after the seventh strata. The Barzahk, or intermediary of imagination, is a region existing between the two. Some part of subatomic space is part of the Barzahk, while some part of physical space is part of the Barzahk. Ibn Arabi employs the term imagination to refer to the Barzahk, an intermediary place, if you like, between the spiritual, the subatomic, and the corporal, the physical world. He also uses it to describe the world of created reality, which is an isthmus, Barzahk, between the being, the universe, and the non-existent. That's what Allah hasn't created. Very literally, the universe is a Barzahk, a barrier between us and the non-existent. Imagination is neither existent nor non-existent, neither known nor unknown, neither affirmed nor denied. Ibn Arabi, the Meccan Revelations. The jinn are closely related to this doctrine of the Barzahk and the world of imagery, something which manifests itself in the diet and sexuality, and above all in the different ways in which it manifests itself. In the Bezels of wisdom, Ibn Arabi sees imagination as being how we create, or manifest as some would see it. This very much builds on the tradition of Ibn Sina and Al Ghazali. Absolute being, al-wujud, al-mutlaq, refers to the omnipotence of Allah, self-sustaining and independent. Absolute non-being, al-adam, al-mutlaq, which lacks existence and cannot stand on its own. Barzahk divides and mediates the absolute being and the absolute non-being. For Ibn Arabi, this Barzahk is core to the creation of dunia, as without it dunia would only be a probability function. Thus Barzahk transforms an idea into reality. But the Barzahk not only connects and separates the other elements, it thus also discriminates between what can be a reality and what must remain the imagination. Despite the Meccan Revelations being seen as Ibn Arabi's magnus opus, I remain convinced that he has simplified some aspects to explain broader concepts to the layman. In particular, I see this as relating to those parts where he describes jinn and other spirits. He uses the common Islamic belief in jinn to illustrate the difference between the divine and human imagination. Regrettably, like Al-Quran itself, Ibn Arabi's explanation are taken literally and not as explanatory metaphors. In fact, it's this relationship between jinn and Barzahks which suggests to me that Ibn Arabi was using jinn as a convenient metaphor. Jinn have both a role in the creation and maintenance of the cosmos, as angels do, but unlike angels have free will and may be disobedient. Is this not more a metaphor for the human imagination than a creature living in dirty places? He mixes miraja, fire and plants, and a form of jinn appeared in an isthmus, Barzahk, between two things, between an embodied spirit located in the lowest and spirit without aware. That part of it is corporalized, tajusum, seek food to eat without dissembling, while that part of it which is angelic receives the ability to take on different appearances. For this reason, sometimes it obeys and sometimes it disobeys. Those of them who oppose then will be punished with 2 fires. Ibn Arabi in the Meccan Revelations. In the Bezels of Wisdom, Ibn Arabi describes 3 levels to the manifested world. The higher level, al-mutlaq, which the unseen realm of spirit beings, angels and abstract meanings. Here things are perceived through insight. The lower level, al-shadada, the physical realm of material bodies, sensory experience and tangible forms. Here things are perceived through our sight. At the intermediary level, the Barzahk, which connects and separates the higher and lower levels. The spiritual and physical levels are linked to the Barzahk through the world of imagination, al-mutlaq. Hence, there are 2 Barzahks, that which mediates between the being and non-being, and that which mediates between the spiritual and non-spiritual. The first being of higher order and is known as the Barzahk al-Barzakhiya. Given the centrality of imagination to create, Ibn Arabi conceives 3 levels to it. Absolute imagination, al-mutlaq, a fundamental imagination connected to the divine, the source from which all imaginative realities emerge. A detached imagination, al-mustafa, an autonomous level of imagination linked to the divine and creation. Attached imagination, mustasail, the human imagination which is the intermediary between the body and the spiritual. Where humans mentally picture things separate from their physical forms. Thus imagination is not simply a mental function, but a link between dunia and the divine. It is therefore fundamental in shaping differing levels of existence. In other words, as I have already said, imagination is the act of co-creation itself. But we need to separate the Barzahk of the imagination from its creative function to comprehend its importance. Detached imagination, Kyle Musfasil, is how Allah creates the cosmos. All of creation exists without the divine mind. Attached imagination, Kyle Mutasil, in contrast, is the human ability to conceptualize that which already exists. The human imagination is merely a reflection of the divine imagination. It is thus dependent on the divine and is temporary and ever-changing. Hence our imagination is a participation in the greater imagination, in the power of Allah. But this is what I refer to as co-creation, as though through imagination we are able to share with Allah the process of creation. The most of us experience the world of imagination directly in dreams, but these are the involuntary imagination. Allah placed dreams in our world so that men might witness the world of imagination and know that there exists another world similar to the sensory world. Ibn Arabi, the Meccan Revelations. In our waking state, we consciously imagine through recalling images we have seen, but also in combining them to form new images. When we combine images, we're able to imagine things which are beyond our reality, but this is at the heart of artistic expression. However imaginative, they are always an amalgam of what we have already seen. The cosmic world is a world of images, where the immaterial reality of the divine realm is translated into perceptible, symbolic language of art, music, poetry and myth. It's also the world of intermediary spirits, whose forms can be manifest to inner sight, and whose voices may be heard by the inner ear. Indeed, Ibn Arabi would insist that the spiritual world can only be known through its representation through the Barzahk. Because the human imagination is tied to dunia, there are only a limited set of elements available to it from what we have already seen. But human imagination can only rearrange elements and not create a new reality. Often the results of this imagination are fantastical and impractical, not corresponding to existing archetypes, whereas the divine imagination is limitless. The limits on human imagined form can be characterized. Existence in reality, al-wujud al-ayn, which can be perceived by the senses, what we call material reality. Existence in the mind, al-wujud al-dini, a thought or image in the mind, such as imagining a physical object. Existence in speech, al-wujud al-latafis, when someone exists as spoken words, and existence in writing, al-wujud al-rahmi, when something is written. But we are limited by our senses, and the deeper we go subatomically, we go into a part of the universe where the building blocks of time don't exist. And the closer we near to the Arsh, the throne of Allah, the limit of the subatomic space, the more timeless we become. Dreams are good examples of this. Scientifically, an hour-long dream only takes 2-3 seconds in real life. The dream world is simply a world we create from subatomic particles, which we experience through our consciousness. Physics is now understanding our consciousness is a state of matter created from subatomic particles, like solids or liquids or gases, and it is the subject to the same laws of physical subatomic particles are including in the discoveries of quantum physics. Ibn Arabi believed imagination to only be valid when it's linked to reality. The divine imagination helps man to avoid fantasy and base his imagination on deeper truths. Thus, imagination can be a source of knowledge or a corrupt fantasy, although this is always constrained by archetypes. For Ibn Arabi, an ignorant person repeats their fantasy as though they were the truth. Once again, I speculate if Ibn Arabi was writing for the common man. For this certainly seems to be the more conservative than his school, the Kubrawi, such as Ibn al-Farid and Ibn Sabin and Abul al-Hasan al-Sharastri. But maybe it's because Ibn Arabi is expressing himself within the confines of dualism, when I see him as essentially non-dualist. Allah is distant from the point of reason and present from the point of view of imagination. The point being that the divine is unchanging. It's the modality of human vision which creates the dualistic perspective. So please humour me in my interpretation, as I'm aware that I'm no better than those I accuse of interpreting Al-Quran to fit their own beliefs. I see Ibn Arabi's critique of corrupt fantasy as referring to how man creates a fantasy when the evidence is lacking. So, taking the example of Jinn, Muslims have created a whole demonology based on medieval and modern Christian discourse, by which the world of Jinn is similar to the world of man and contains a similar hierarchy. The same is true of almost anything paranormal. Whilst there may be some precedence within the divine imagination, after all, here anything is possible. It abandons the discipline of the probable when extrapolating to dunia. Thus, like Jinn, we can see the paranormal as part of man's imagination. Of course, some aspects may come from the divine imagination, but we have no idea which. Thus we resort to a corrupt fantasy to fill in the gaps of our real knowledge. But can we equate divinatory insight with revelation? In the sense that revelation is meaning discerned through the senses, then yes. Furthermore, Ibn Arabi claims that seeing through can occur at any time, whether asleep or awake, disclosing the divine similitudes in creation. Revelation is a meaning. When God wants meaning to descend to sense of perception, it has to pass through the presence of imagination before it really reaches sense perception. The reality of imagination demands that it gives sensory form to everything that becomes actualized within it. If the revelation arrives at a time of wakefulness, it's called imaginalization. That is why revelations begin with the imagination. I believe Ibn Arabi's warning to go even further, and that is to base our imagination on probability. Some might use the Enlightenment fetish of logic here. Especially today, so much is a corrupt fantasy presented as fact. The media, the rule of law and education institutions have been recruited to support these corrupt fantasies, but we have a duty to seek the truth. In the Sufi tradition, self-knowledge is the key to spiritual knowledge. Thus, self-knowledge leads to the mode of being in the world in which practical action stems from a profound understanding of its own underlying principles. All forms of divination reveal ways in which the path may be followed through the choice of actions, which appears to already be known on some hidden, inner, unconscious or divine level. Hence we see the temporal, money and the economy as facts when they're all constructs of man. Indeed, it's the temporal which is the source of what we might call evil and our dislocation from Allah. For the temporal embodies the corruption of imagination below the moon, creating the framework for the corrupt fantasy.